Hi everyone, this is audap. Let's continue our game of Chaos Head Noah running on Nintendo Switch. Just outside the front lobby of AH Tokyo General Hospital, Yua Kusunoki was staring at what lay beyond the automatic door. Bon had told her to leave, so she had come outside, but she'd been too worried to go any further than that. Bon had disappeared up the stairs, chasing a mysterious figure. It had been less than 3 minutes, but she was looking into the lobby to see if he would come back. After Bon had gone alone to the hospital, Yua had ignored Momose's warnings and gone after him. She needed to do whatever it would take to find out the truth about her sister's death and who had killed her. Somebody had sent Bon those threatening phone calls and had kidnapped his partner, Sua. Whoever it was, they were probably the person who'd killed Mia. Something was telling her that, and so, when the urge had come to follow him, she couldn't fight it off. Despite all the warnings that getting involved was dangerous, she'd come here anyway. Of course, now that she was here, there wasn't anything she could do. She was just a powerless teenage girl. Her hope had been that Bon would heroically catch the killer, and then she'd have a chance to question him. Why did my little sister have to die? That was the question Yua wanted to ask most of all. She felt somebody looking at her. She glanced around nervously. The sun hadn't been down for more than 2 hours, but the hospital's front entrance was eerily silent. The after-hours entrance was right next to it. This was also where the emergency patients would be brought in, but there was nobody there. A train was passing right alongside the hospital, but there were almost no cars on the wide street in front of it, and no pedestrians at all. This spot, between Shibuya and Shinjuku, 2 towns that never slept, was like a shadow born of 2 powerful lights. Whoever was looking at her, she couldn't find them. She put a hand on her chest and took a deep breath to calm her nervousness. Then, for no reason, she looked towards the hospital wards. A girl was standing there. The lights at the entrance of the wards were off, and it was hard to see, but for some reason she could see the girl clearly against the darkness.
Mia-chan.
She whispered, knowing it was impossible, and yet unable to stay silent. The girl looked just like her. It was just like her dead younger twin sister. She recognized the girl's outfit, too. It was her younger sister's clothes. She thought for a moment that it might be a ghost, and the hairs on the back of her neck stood up on end. The girl turned around and ran, heading towards the automatic door that marked the entrance to the hospital ward. When she got close, the door opened. So she wasn't a ghost then. Yua stood there for a moment, stunned, before starting to run after her. The ward must have been past lights out, because it was even quieter than the outside. Each step Yua took echoed far down the hallways. Just like the outside, the quiet was almost eerie. The girl disappeared up the stairs. She heard what sounded like a faint laugh. It was like a scene out of a horror movie, Yua thought to herself. She took a slow step up the stairs, and then another. She arrived at the 2nd floor. She looked down at the hallway, but there was nobody there. She wondered if maybe she was seeing things when... She heard a girl's laugh from the floor above. The voice, the way she laughed, Yua knew them both well. Yua went up to the 3rd floor, looked down the hallway, and saw a girl who looked just like her standing there. One of the victims of the first NewGen case, the group dive, her sister, who died 2 months ago. She was standing there, as real and solid as anything around her. Yua took off her glasses and rubbed her eyes, but when she put them back on, Mia was still there.
Mia-chan, nano? Doumou?
The voice was far too clear to be a hallucination. There was a fearless smile on the girl's face. It was just like Yua remembered her. Mia was always like that. She always used to laugh in such a mocking way, so she could play the villain.
Mia-chan. 本当に私がミアであなたがユアだと思う？どういうこと？もし逆だったらあなたはミア 死んだのはユア。殺したのはあなた。何を言っているの？あなたは親に愛される姉が疎ましくてネットで殺人を依頼したのよ。しかも自殺に見せかけるように見ず知らずの4人も一緒に飛び降りさせた。あなたは姉になりすまして妹の死を悲しみ、涙を流しているふりをしながら、これまで姉が独占していた親の愛を手に入れて、心の中ではほくそ笑んでいる。違うわ。私はユアよ。誰がそれを証明するの？私はユアのはず。でも確信が持てない。私を私だと証明するものって何？顔？名前？記憶？自分のことなのに。自分で自分を証明するなんて不可能よ。私がミヤだっていう可能性もあるの？あなたはいろいろと調べていたじゃない。多重人格、無遊病、記憶捏造、それから妄想。
All the research Yua had done about how imperfect memories were and how easily they could be faked suddenly seemed truly real for the first time. She didn't know who she was. Who was she? Mia shook her head violently.
あなたは誰
Yua, the girl who always played the goody two-shoes, who was automatically loved and praised by her parents. Mia, the girl who always played the bad girl, who actively sought out her parents' hate while being jealous of the affection they gave her older sister.
さあ、私も。あなたも。
Mia, or maybe Yua, began to guide Yua, or maybe Mia. Without a sound, they began to walk.
私と同じ目に遭いなさい。
Yua and Mia, two identical twins, indistinguishable from each other. The boundary between them grew more and more indistinct. The two buildings were two huge boxes standing in the darkness, but compared to the huge skyscrapers of Shinjuku next to them, they were like children looking up at grown-ups. The roof of the ward, that was where Mio had brought Yua. There was a gap in a corner of the tall fence surrounding it, just big enough for a person to pass through. It wasn't clear who made it or why. Mia and Yua went through the gap and stood on the edge of the roof. In front of them was the outpatient building. It wasn't as tall as the building they were on, and they could see the garden below. But there were no lights there, and even if someone was there, Yua couldn't tell. The wind was blowing hard on the roof. The two girls' clothing and long soft hair flapped violently as the wind blew into them.
私たちはもともと一つだったんだから。また戻るだけ。一歩を踏み出せば、あなたは私になる。
Yua's voice was monotone. Her eyes were empty. She spread out her hands to keep her balance against the violent winds. Mia was right next to her, spreading out her hands in the same way. She turned to Yua and laughed.
耐える必要なんてないよ。あなたは私の痛みを知らなくちゃならない。さあ、飛んで。そうすれば、私もあなたも同じ痛みを共有するわ。私はどっちなの？私？あなた？それを聞いても意味はないわ。どっちにしたって。私は飛ぶ。
All hesitation disappeared from within her, and Yua went to take a step forward. A gunshot tore through the night air. Suddenly, Yua came back to her senses. She looked down beneath her and screamed. She saw how high up she was and suddenly felt dizzy. She lost her balance and almost fell. She grabbed on desperately to the fence behind her and just barely managed to avoid falling. The gunshot had come from the roof on the other building below her. She looked down at it again. She could just barely make out human figures in the middle of the rooftop garden. There were two of them. One was lying on the ground. The other was standing next to it.
Bansan.
Had the detective shot someone? Or had someone shot him?
何をしてるの？どうして私と同じ痛みを味わおうとしないの？そんなの卑怯よ。ずるいわ。みやちゃん。違うわ。私はユアよ。ユアは、私。ミヤはあなた。あなたは一体、何なの？私はあなたの望んだもの。あなたは私の望んだもの。
Mia leapt at her. She wrapped her arms around Yua's neck. Yua felt incredible pressure on her throat. She couldn't breathe. Mia was no ghost. There was a real physical body in front of her, and it was strangling her.
お願い、死んでよ。今日ぐらい、私のお願いを聞いて。いつも我慢してきたんだから。
Yua's vision turned red. Her hands flailed through the air, but she couldn't grab onto anything. She was going to die here. In the face of this overwhelming fear, Yua used every muscle in her whole body to push back against Mia with a strength she didn't even know she had. But Mia was strong. She didn't budge at all. Now, even Yua's thoughts were turning red. Her mind felt like it was being covered in sticky red blood. She shook her head violently, and her glasses fell off. Now, from the outside, you could tell who was who. Whoever won could be whoever they wanted. If Yua died, Mia could become Yua. If Mia died, Yua could become Mia. Yua felt a growing sense of resignation within her. In front of her was the face of Mia, or perhaps Yua, blurred with hatred. She looked away, not wanting to see it. With red eyes and red vision, she saw one of the flower beds and the flowers on the rooftop garden. It felt like there was a strange shadow mixed in with them. Maybe her eyes were playing tricks on her without her glasses. But now she couldn't even breathe. She felt a tiny sense of peace working its way through the pain. Part of her thought that maybe it would be okay to give up, but her survival instincts made her reject the peace she felt. Yua reached out towards the strange shadow. The planter was at least 2 meters away, and it was far too far away for her hand to reach. But she felt something cold and hard in her hand. She grabbed it, almost unconsciously. And then her fading consciousness became clear again, as if a fog had lifted. A powerful invisible shockwave shook the air. Red lights, like flower petals, danced in the sky, and her twin sister was knocked away. Yua coughed and staggered to her feet, then looked down in awe at the item in her hand. It was a sword. So dazzling and elegant. So pure. So delicate and fragile. And so beautiful it brought you to tears. The thing in her hands. The first thing it reminded her was of the sword she told Bon about, the one she'd seen Ayase holding in the tunnel.
今のは何？
Mia crawled out of the planter that the shockwave had knocked her into. She was holding her head in pain.
あなたは何をしたの？私は、みやちゃん。私、やっとわかったわ。どうしてここまで一生懸命あなたの死の真相を調べていたのか。私を殺そうとしたの？私は、また殺されるところだったの？また？結局、私はあなたが怖かったのよ。 当てつけに死なれたと思ったの。あなたがわからなかったの。あなたが死んだ理由は私のせいじゃないって証明して安心したかった。最低のお姉ちゃんね。どうして死んでくれないのよ。
There was no sense in talking to her anymore. Two hearts that had once been one were now completely separate, never to rejoin again. Mia came to her once more. Yua remembered the pain she'd felt just a moment ago, and shivered in terror. There was a flash. The sword in her hand curved in a sharp arc. It sliced the ghost in two. Mia froze. She had a stunned expression on her face. She ran her hands along the wound, which ran from her left side to her right shoulder. There was no blood.
ミヤちゃんは2ヶ月前に死にました。それならあなたは誰なんですか？
Large particles, big enough to see with the naked eye, began to appear around Mia's body. Her body began to bubble and gradually fall apart, its outlines fading away. And then it transformed into something else. Yua looked on in shock. In Mia's place appeared a fat man. He was wearing a denim shirt and filthy jeans. He had a backpack on his back. It was a man she'd never seen.
誰？あなた誰？どうしてミヤちゃんの姿に？どうやって？
Confused, Yua began to step backwards, the D-sword still in her hand. The man hadn't expected her to see him, it appeared, and he was beginning to panic himself.
お前こそなんでまさかこのガキギガロマニアックスか聞いてないぞくそどうしたら
The object was almost perfectly level as it flew at him, as if gravity didn't exist. By the time he turned around, it had already stabbed itself into the backpack he was carrying. A pale flash of light came from the backpack. He went perfectly stiff as if hit by an electric shock. His eyes rolled back into his head as he fell forward on his face. He was foaming at the mouth and his body was twitching. The thing that had struck his backpack was a beautiful curved sword like the one that Yua had just grabbed from the air.
これ
Yua recognized the weapon. She'd seen it before. Someone was coming closer. Yua looked up. She saw someone appear out of the darkness.
何事かと思ったらこんな騒ぎになっていたのね。岸本さん。
Ayase gave Yua's sword a single expressionless glance.
感じる大いなる意志を。私がこの病院に居続けた意味はこういうことだったんだ。
Yua had fallen to the ground in shock. Ayase picked up Yua's glasses off the roof and offered them to her, taking a knee to look down at her face. Her slender fingers gently stroked Yua's hair as she put the glasses on her face.
君もグラジオールの黒騎士だったのね。
Her smile was weak and fragile.
僕を殺してくれないか。
Nanami's face tensed up, but she quickly forced a fake smile.
お兄、つまんない冗談やめなよ。
That wasn't how Nanami would react. Instead of laughing it off, the real Nanami would yell, "That's not funny," and then I'd be in for a long lecture. Not that it mattered anyway. It didn't matter. If this Nanami wasn't going to kill me, then I wasn't interested in her at all. She could just disappear right now, and I wouldn't care. Sedaton and I stared into each other's eyes. If Sedaton was 3D, she'd grant my wish, I knew. If I didn't exist anyway, why couldn't I be 2D instead?
ねえ、そんな冗談は置いといて。 その話があるんだ。あのね、お兄にもらったバングルなくしちゃったの。どうせ適当に扱ってたんだろうとか言わないでね。ナナ、そんなことしてないもん。本当に大切にしてたもん。なのにどこでなくしたのかもわかんなくて。
She practically cared about that thing? How stupid. From my perspective, it was the stupidest thing in the world. It was a present from me, wasn't it? Nothing I gave somebody could have any value at all.
僕はもうそうじゃない。僕はもうそうじゃない。
How could I be sure I'd even given it to her? Maybe the fact that I'd given it to her at all was just a delusion, too. This whole world was worthless. Everything in my memories was worthless.
僕はもうそうじゃない。僕はもうそうじゃない。
お兄が初めてくれたプレゼントだったのにな。なんでなくしちゃったりしたんだろう。
僕はもうそうじゃない。僕はもうそうじゃない。
お兄、聞いてる？
僕はもうそうじゃない。僕はもうそうじゃない。
お兄はどうしていつもそうなの？
Her head slumped forward. She clenched her fist tightly. Nanami's whisper was soft.
たまにはお兄ちゃんらしく頼りがいのあるとこ見せてよ。
What? You're asking the wrong person for help. I'm just a delusion.
僕はもうそうじゃない。僕はもうそうじゃない。
I stared at Sirotan's smile, making sure not to let myself see anything else. There was no reason to listen to Nanami's words. There was no point. I was just a delusion.
今までずっとナナがしっかりしなきゃって思って頑張ってきたけど、でもね、やっぱりナナだってたまには誰かに甘えたいよ。誰かにじゃなくてお兄に甘えたいよ。
僕はもうそうじゃない。僕はもうそうじゃない。
だってお兄はナナのお兄なんだから。お兄に頼りたいって思うことナナにもあるんだよ。
僕はもうそうじゃない。僕はもうそうじゃない。
そりゃいつもああしろこうしろ言われてお兄も嫌だろうけど、それはお兄がだらしないから仕方なく。言いたいことはそういうことじゃなくて。
僕はもうそうじゃない。僕はもうそうじゃない。
ナナだっていろいろ愚痴を聞いてもらいたい時とか泣きたい時とかあるんだよ。お兄に優しくしてもらいたい時とかあるんだよ。
僕はもうそうじゃない。僕はもうそうじゃない。
ねえ、お兄、ナナの話聞いてよ。ナナ、今すごく悲しいんだよ。お兄にもらった大切なバングルなくなっちゃって、声出して泣きたいくらい悲しくて辛くて。お兄に抱きしめてほしいのに、お兄に頭撫でて慰めてほしいのに。ねえ、 今日だけはナナのわがまま受け止めてよ。
I slowly looked up and saw Nanami crying. She was trying to hold back the tears, but they were falling from her eyes anyway. Rimi Sakata shivered as she opened the glass door and came inside what looked like a lobby. A freezing chill came up from the floor. There was no sign of anyone nearby. Given the location, that was only natural, but knowing what waited ahead, Rimi still wished there was at least one person there. In front of her was a soundproof door, like you'd seen at a movie theater. There was a chill coming from the gap between it and the floor, and a white fog like dry ice. Rimi bit down hard on her lip. She was holding her D-sword in both hands. She already real-booted it.
だから大丈夫。だから怖がっちゃダメだ。
Rimi told herself this forcefully as she could. Then she took one last big breath before pushing open the door with her shoulder. Her eyes went wide when she saw what was inside. It was a device, impossibly huge and monstrous. The room was dome-like, with the device itself at its center. There was a faint, eerie sound that echoed throughout the huge space. It was low, like a beast roaring. The sound meant the device was running.
の圧もう動いてるんだ。
君のおかげですよ。
A voice answered her. When she heard it, she felt terror in her very soul.
崎畑リミ。1年半ぶりですね。
Rimi's instincts were screaming in terror. Her heart started to pound and her body began to shake. Terrible memories assaulted her mind. Her dark past was threatening to come back. She shook her head gently and gripped the D-sword to give herself strength, then turned towards the direction of their voice. The huge device, Noah 2, and next to it was a tall man in a suit, and...
ナナちゃん。
Takumi Nishijo was being held there. A torn uniform, a bloody bandage on her right hand, a limp, slumped head. She was terribly pale. Nanami was struck wordless at the sight. Like Jesus, nailed to the cross. No, it wasn't a cross that held her captive. It was a terrible, almost malicious shape. All the evil in the world, all the chaos in the world, all the wickedness in the world. It was all of these things and more.
君がこの1年半どこで何をしていたかについて興味はありませんが困りますね。あまりうろちょろされると。
The man, Genichi Nodase, had a calm voice, but there was a knife-like edge to it. Rimi forced herself to stand tall and glare at him.
ナナちゃんを離して。
ほう。まさかここに来たのはお友達を助けに来たという理由ですか。
ナナちゃんを離して。その子は何も関係ないでしょ。
では直接話してみてはどうですか。
Rimi was caught off guard by Nodase's offer. She was trying her best to stand strong, but the second she'd seen his face, her legs had started to shake. She called out to Nanami without moving from where she stood.
ナナちゃん。
Nanami's head suddenly moved. Her closed eyes opened just a little. She looked up. Her empty eyes stared at Rimi.
リミさん。大丈夫。今助けてあげるから。
In the middle of her sentence, Nanami's face began to twist in pain. Her face was pale and her breathing was ragged.
痛いよ。右手が痛いの。
And then her body fell from the cross.
ナナちゃん。ねえ、リミさ
Nanami was lying on the ground, only her head moving. It was as if she was looking for something.
ナナのバングル知らないかな。見つからなくて。ナナのバングルどこにもなくて。
She stood up slowly and began to search her surroundings with her left hand.
バングルだね。わかった。私知ってるから。だから私と一緒にここを出よう。病院に行こう。ね。手が痛いよ。ナナはなんでリミさんのことを知ってるんだっけ。前にどこで会ったんだっけ。リミさんなの。リミさんがナナのバングル。嘘。どうして。ひどいよ。
Mimi realized that something was wrong with Nanami and turned her eyes towards Nodase. He smirked as he silently watched their conversation.
ナナちゃんに何を見せてるの。
Nanami's gaze was locked on Rimi. She slowly staggered to her feet like a newborn fawn. She reached her right arm towards Rimi. The bandage was soaked with blood. It looked like her hand was still attached. But bright red drops, one after another, were falling from it. A pool of blood was forming at her feet. She needed medical treatment fast. But despite her hurry, Rimi couldn't get any closer. Getting closer to Nanami meant getting closer to the man next to her. Rimi almost cried out of sheer frustration.
リミさんが持ってたの。ナナちゃん、帰ろう。こっちに来て。どうして持ってくの。返して。ナナのバングル返して。落ち着いて、ナナちゃん。お兄からもらったナナの大切なあれは誰にも渡したくないの。返してよ。ナナちゃん返して。
A pained scream. A drop of blood fell from Nanami's wrist. The drop crystallized before it hit the ground. Something that looked like a mineral ore appeared out of nowhere around it. Some kind of inorganic shell had burst through a hole in the space. The crystal and ore instantly fused into a single shape. It seemed far more like a cross than the thing which had been holding Nanami. Or maybe a sword, stabbing straight downward, rejecting everything around it.
これはディソード。返してよ。お願い。
Nanami held the sword to her chest, embracing it. Her tears of sorrow fell on it, and it began to flash crimson like a beating heart.
でないとリミさんのこと許さない。そんな。ナナちゃんもキガロマニアックスだったの。今日だけはナナのわがまま受け止めてよ。
Nanami was crying. She was trying to hold back her tears, but they fell from her eyes anyway. I gave her a single glance, then I looked back up at the ceiling and returned to counting the rust spots.
抜かれたって僕には何もできないよ。僕は妄想の存在なんだから。妄想の。
そんなこと言わないでよ。お兄が妄想のはずないじゃん。だってナナは小さい頃のお兄のこと知ってるもん。いつもナナに世話かけさせてちっとも頼りにならないけど でも、お兄は昔からずっと、ナナと一緒だったよ。
That's right. Nanami was right. I remembered Nanami from when she was little. I had my own memories of being young, too. I remembered being in elementary school and not being able to go on the field trip, and how I'd watched the bus with my classmates on it get into an accident. I'd even remembered Mr. Saito, my teacher, who died. Who should I believe? Rimi, a girl who I didn't even know, or my little sister who I'd grown up with? Wasn't the answer obvious? Rimi was lying. Nanami was telling the truth. And if Nanami was real, then so was I.
ななみ
I reached out a hand towards Nanami. Her existence was my only hope. She was the one thing that could possibly save me.
助けてななみ助けて
If Nanami's warmth was real, I could prove that I was real too. Nanami had been sobbing, but now she wiped away her tears. She turned her red-lidded eyes to me and gave me a sad smile.
抱きしめてくれる？
I nodded, again and again, and again and again. And if that would save Nanami, then it would save me. I'd happily give my bratty little sister as many hugs as she wanted. After all, she was my only little sister in the whole wide world.
ななみ助けて
I wanted to feel her warmth as soon as I possibly could, so when she slowly leapt into my arms, I wrapped my hands around her. Tightly, tightly. I tried to hold her.
お兄
And just before I could, a pale light appeared around her body and she dissolved into a million glowing pieces of light. The lights burst like bubbles in the air, one after another. My outstretched hand touched nothing. There was no warmth at my chest. In front of my eyes, Nanami disappeared. Takumi Nishijo held the D-sword she'd created from her blood tight to her body, using only her left hand. Her right hand just hung alongside it. The blood dripping from the bandage was running down the small groove in the blade before falling to the ground.
痛い。知ってたの？ナナちゃんがギガロマニアックスだって。
Rimi's question was directed at Nodase, who'd been watching the events fold silently. No matter how much hate was in her gaze, she seemed completely uninterested.
偶然の産物というものですよ。
ナナちゃんにひどいことしたくせに、何が偶然なの？
君の時のような苦労はしませんでした。我が社にはすでに覚醒させるためのマニュアルが確立していますから。もっとも西条匠にだけはそのマニュアルも通用しませんが、イレギュラーな化け物は扱いづらいことこの上ない。
化け物だなんて言わないで。
君も化け物だからですか？
そういう話はしてない。
虚無から生まれたものだからと言い換えた方が良かったですね。
Rimi looked away, biting her lip in frustration. She was still shaking. She had to save Nanami, but her legs wouldn't move, like they were rooted to the floor. Nodase, however, seemed completely unfazed. He gave Nanami's head a loving pat. Nanami didn't react. Her head was slumped, and she was taking one shallow breath after another.
闇のある一点だけを灯しているスポットライト。その周囲には無数の死体が転がっているのでしょうが、誰にも見えない。君自身にもです。
そんな話やめて。
例えば君が自殺をしたら、 スポットライトは数十センチ横にずれて君を闇で覆ってくれるでしょう。そして何も知らない別の誰かが代わりにスポットライトを浴びる。
Notice shrugged and fell silent.
痛い。ナナちゃんを解放してほしいんだけど。
拘束は解きましたが。
連れて帰る。
構いませんよ。もう用済みです。
ナナちゃん、入ろう。その件は消して。だったら、バングル返して。返すから。
Mimi knew where Nanami's hand was being kept on that day, the night when Nanami's right hand had been delivered to Takumi's room, the night when Takumi had been humiliated on the roof of O-Front. Rimi had taken the hand from his fridge. Shogun had it now. It was being kept cold so that it wouldn't rot. The bangle was there too.
お兄からもらったの。ナナのだよ。バングル。勝手に持って行って。ひどいよ。
Nanami's voice was getting more and more violent.
落ち着いて深呼吸して。自分をしっかり持って。
一つ聞きますが。
Nordase suddenly interrupted them. In her mind, Rimi grimaced.
西条匠にとっては君たち二人のうちどちらがより重要度が高い存在ですか？
Rimi looked down.
リミさんなんか。
Nanami looked up. Light had returned to her empty eyes. They were abnormally bright. Rimi quickly brought up her sword, but froze inside the sudden darkness. The lights had been cut. Whether it was an accident or deliberate, Rimi couldn't tell.
負けちゃダメ。
Rimi whispered to herself. Her voice made the air vibrate, but quickly melted away inside the darkness. She realized she couldn't hear the awful rumbling coming from Noah 2 anymore either. She didn't like the dark. It brought back memories. Rimi looked around her. There was darkness everywhere. Not a trace of light was to be found. She could not see because it was dark, or she could not see because her vision wasn't working. She couldn't tell which was up and which was down. She didn't even know where she was. The darkness worked its way inside all her senses. She couldn't even sense her own body anymore. It was like her body had transformed into a gas. Like her mind was leaking from its vessel. Past and present melted together, and Rimi's memories began to mix with one another. When was it now? When was the past? Alright, why don't we stop it there? This is Autopostrophe. You've been watching Chaos Head Noah running on Nintendo Switch. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed watching. I will see you with the next stream.